The moment the alien general heard the report, something cold clenched around his heart. He didn't rise from his war throne. He didn't even blink. He just stared forward, as though the galaxy had suddenly become smaller and far more dangerous. You did what? General Arkash's voice was low, barely more than a growl in the massive war chamber. But every soldier on the deck heard it like a thunderclap. The officer stepped forward, emboldened by what he thought was praise. We have taken over 5,000 Terran juveniles, General. From the Vega colonies and several outposts along the Orion Drift. Civilians, all of them, mostly younglings. No military resistance. We believe this will end their will to fight. Arkash didn't look at him. He looked past him. Through him. Through time itself, as if seeing 100 futures play out, and in every one, the same thing happened. You took their children, Arkash said again, as if trying to make the words real by speaking them. You stole human offspring. Yes. General, the officer said, chest high. It was strategic. Their colonies are soft targets. You've doomed us all. The words dropped like a gravity hammer. Confused murmurs rippled through the War Council. The chamber was carved from obsidian alloy, lined with floating glyphs of conquered worlds. Screens glowed with the battle maps of Sector 19. It all looked so victorious, so clean. And yet, the general sat as if the entire empire had just been handed its execution. General Arkash, a warbringer asked, brow plates drawn in confusion. Surely we've struck the final blow? The Terrans have lost. Their fleet is scattered. Earth's surface is quarantined. This is our moment. Arkash finally rose. 7 feet tall, scaled in armor carved from dead star beasts. He was one of the most feared commanders in the Zalvari Empire. He had broken the Ulmari resistance. He had turned the oceans of the Shintori into glass. He had never once doubted a victory until now. He turned slowly to the room. Do you know what humans are? Do you truly understand what they are? Silence fell. They're not like us. Not like the Vital. Not like the Vorn. Every species in the galaxy, when pushed to desperation, retreats. We bargain. We rebuild. We yield. But humans, his voice lowered, humans dig in. They remember. They become something else. A holoscreen blinked to life above him. It was old footage, grainy, from a helmet cam recorded during the First Contact War. A human, barely 20 years old, was cornered in a trench. One leg shattered, surrounded by enemy fire. The alien squad advanced, confident. The human pulled a pin with his teeth and surged forward, dragging himself on elbows, screaming something in English. The screen cut out in white fire. That boy, Arkash said, killed 8 elite Vital Rangers. He shouldn't have. Lasted 10 seconds. Instead, he held the line for 20 minutes. One of the younger tacticians frowned. But General, this was decades ago. The human militaries are fractured. Their strength has waned. They don't need armies. Arkash snapped. They need a reason. His hand waved over the star map. And we just gave them the only reason they'll ever need. Still, there was skepticism in the room. Warriors of the Empire had fought Terrans for years. They knew them as stubborn. Inventive, unpredictable, but never invincible. But Arkash had seen something the others hadn't, something ancient. Buried in the classified archives of the First Contact Archive locked files. No one dared open unless they wanted to sleep with nightmares for the rest of their life. He had opened them. He had seen the reports from the Black Cell research teams. The old stories of Earth's past. Stories of human mothers lifting wreckage with shattered bones to save their children. Of fathers walking into fire. Of orphaned siblings building death traps from scrap metal. Of children surviving entire wars without food, without guidance, just because they refused to give up. Terran children, he said, are not like ours. They aren't protected. They're shaped by their world. Earth is a crucible. A death. World, everything on that rock tries to kill them from birth. He stared around the room. And when you take them, when you steal them from their families, you are not taking hostages. His voice dropped into a whisper. You are forging weapons. One of the younger captains chuckled nervously. General, they're juveniles. Surely the Empire can handle a few defiant adolescents. The transmission cut in mid-sentence. Every light in the war chamber flickered. The central hologram blinked, distorted, and then shifted. A different voice played through the room, distorted, filtered, unmistakably human. Return our children. The screen shifted again. This time, to footage from a prison barge transport Theta 9. Inside, the guards lay slumped in pools of blood. The doors were open, the containment systems offline. A single sentence was burned into the hull by plasma torch. We're not afraid of monsters. We were raised by them. Then the feed cut. General Arkash turned to the silent room. There. Already free. They've already begun. And in that moment, every warrior in the chamber finally understood. The war wasn't over. Asterisk above the moons of Krinder. The sky burned with the soft shimmer of Zalvari fleet engines repositioning. Through low orbit. On paper, the war was over. Humanity's last colony world had fallen. Earth had been scorched and sealed. The children, thousands of them, were secured in fortified relocation centers across multiple sectors. The Empire had declared victory, but on the ground, things didn't feel like victory. Commander Elvex, overseer of Detention Sector 7V on Trascan Prime, paced his command deck uneasily. The prison complex beneath him housed over 600 human juveniles. The children had not cried. They had not pleaded. Most had stared in eerie silence as they were separated, scanned, and locked away. Some of them had even smiled. That bothered Elvex. He presided over the capture of several species. Most broke quickly. Even the more defiant ones eventually cracked after prolonged separation and sleep deprivation. But not the Terran young. They had stared at the interrogators like they were studying them. A 6-year-old boy refused food for 4 days, only to suddenly feign collapse and rip a throat out with his teeth when a medic entered the cell. A 12-year-old girl jammed a plasma coupler into the floor grid and shorted half the detention wing systems. When isolated, the children sang in strange, coordinated tones that interfered with the intercom frequencies. One engineer called it intentional harmonic sabotage. But how could children know how to do that? Guards began requesting transfers. Some refused to enter the holding blocks. They spoke in hushed tones about the way the children moved when the lights flickered like they knew it was coming. One soldier swore a group of children stood completely still for 10 minutes, eyes closed, until the guard dropped a stun rod. Then they moved all at once like a single organism. They're just testing us, Elvex told himself. Like all animals, they'll break eventually. But he didn't believe it. A few decks below, in Cell Cluster Delta, the air was heavy with tension. A group of 10 children ages estimated between 8 and 14 Terran years sat in a circle. They weren't playing. They weren't talking. They were planning. The eldest, a boy with a buzz cut and a scar across his chin, whispered something too low for surveillance to pick up. The rest nodded. One girl tied a shoelace into a knot tight, then loose, then tight again. A code. Another passed a button from her sleeve to the next child. A few minutes later, it disappeared into a wall panel. These weren't accidents. They were dry runs. On Trascan's sister facility, the prison warden filed a report that would later be deleted from every official archive. A child barely 10 had assembled a cum jammer using parts from a guard's boot, a spoon, and 2 chewing gum wrappers. How? No one knew. When asked, the child only said, "Dad taught me to build worse with less." Worse still, the human juveniles were organizing across facilities. Coordinated behavior was being reported in over 24 locations. Each center claimed the same strange issues: synchronized resistance, synchronized silence, synchronized motion. The last time such behavior was recorded in galactic warfare, it involved a race with hive mind linkages, but humans weren't. Hive-minded doubt they were something else. One of the younger researchers, a Zalvari named Ulra, reviewed hours of surveillance footage. She noticed subtle patterns: blinks, head tilts, finger taps repeating across prisoners who hadn't seen each other since capture. She ran the data through a linguistic modeling engine. The result: covert Morse-based signaling system. When she presented her findings, the review board laughed. "They're children," they said, "not spies." But she didn't laugh. It had just begun. Asterisk. Because the deeper she dug, the more she found references to something called the Nest. Cross-referenced across Terran culture archives, the Nest was associated with survival training camps for war orphans, rogue defense initiatives, and Black Ops indoctrination programs. Most were deemed conspiracies, urban legends. Yet now, the term appeared on the walls of 5 separate prison blocks, carved with fingernails, drawn in blood, etched into meals. The Nest remembers. In the 4th week of occupation, anomalies spiked. Security cameras failed in over a dozen facilities. Guards reported missing weapons, tools, and biometrics hacked from admin consoles. Still, the command structure dismissed it as sabotage from outside forces. Then came the first broadcast. It cut across all Zalvari systems for 3 seconds. A child's voice, distorted and eerie, played through every command center, ship, and drone control. "You took us, but we were never yours to hold." Then silence, no trace, no source. General Arkash, who had warned the council from the start, received the transcript and exhaled slowly. He closed his eyes. "They're already mobilizing," he whispered. "You caged them, but you forgot what Earth teaches its young." He summoned his aides. "Begin evacuating the core detention facilities. If we can return the children." Perhaps, he stopped mid-sentence. One of the detention ships, Theta 9, had just dropped off long-range scanners. Then another, then a third. No explosions, no wreckage, just gone. General Arkash stood, trembling. "You don't understand," he muttered. "It's not their technology. It's not even their rage." The war chamber stared at him. "It's their instinct. You made them afraid for someone else. And nothing in this galaxy is more dangerous than a human who's been taught to protect." Far above, inside the vent shafts of Detention Block 3, a girl with burn marks on her arms whispered into a communicator made from scrap and stolen wiring. "Phase 1 complete," she said. "We go silent now. Nest awakens at dusk." She smiled in the dark. And all across the stars, the pieces began to move. In the dead silence between stars, the wreckage of the Zalvari prison barge Theta 9 spun slowly, its twisted hull trailing frozen vapor. The ship's distress beacon was silent. Its I-core blackened. No explosion, no impact. Just systems stripped from within, sliced open with surgical precision. A Zalvari retrieval crew approached cautiously, weapons ready. They'd been expecting a wreck, maybe a malfunction. What they found was something else. No bodies, no human children, no surviving guards. Just walls scorched with plasma residue, and a single, deliberate phrase burned across the airlock interior in 3 languages, including Zalvari Standard: "You taught us to survive. Now watch what we do with it." The retrieval team commander called it in. Protocol dictated a full lockdown of all detention facilities. A fleet was dispatched to isolate remaining juvenile transports. But by the time they arrived, 5 more vessels had vanished. No mayday, no survivors. All records erased, no trace on deep space scans. At first, command suspected sabotage, internal betrayal, pirate raids perhaps. Then the intercepted footage surfaced. It was decrypted from a drifting Zolvari escape pod recovered near the driftline expanse. The pilot, a low-ranking detention officer, had fled after witnessing what the transmission labeled Event H. His logs were frantic, distorted by terror, but the visual footage was intact. It showed the children of Theta 9, dozens of them standing in the main corridor, unarmed, uniformed, calm. At first, they simply stared at the guards approaching with stun rifles. Then the lights flickered. In the span of 12 seconds, the hallway became chaos. Not random, desperate. Chaos, structured chaos. The kind only achieved through training, discipline, and instinct. 3 children surged forward to block the guard squad's line of sight. A fourth dropped from an overhead panel, slicing a power conduit with salvaged wire. One girl, no older than 8, shoved the stun baton into a junction box, sending a chain. Surged through the deck plating. Weapons failed, lights died. And in the dark, the children moved fast, efficient, unafraid. By the end of the footage, every guard was down. Every system overridden. The last thing the camera caught before being destroyed was a boy looking directly into the lens and saying, "Dad said never wait to be rescued. You rescue yourself." The escape pod's pilot had fled before they sealed the bridge. He begged for asylum, but the command board deemed him compromised. His pod was vaporized by orbital cannon an hour later. But the footage had already gone viral within the military network. Officers watched in silence. Veterans stared pale-faced. Because these weren't just smart kids. These were trained children. Trained specifically for situations like this. And then someone remembered. An old Earth Defense Initiative, blacklisted decades ago. A program so controversial even human governments tried to forget it, Project Nestfire. Its goal had been simple on paper. If we can't keep war away from the children, then we teach the children how to fight back. It was shut down officially after a scandal involving underage field operatives. The world shamed it. Buried it, but it hadn't died. It had gone underground. Across the galaxy, new transmissions emerged, scattered, low frequency and all, bearing a strange symbol, a cracked egg with fire inside. Those who knew Earth's darker history trembled. The symbol had only ever appeared once before, during the Titan uprising on Europa, where a small group of Earth-born orphans hijacked a nuclear freighter and used it to end a war in 4 hours. Now, it was back, and it was spreading. Admiral Vekton of the Zolvari 7th Armada convened an emergency summit of the High Command. The mood was quiet, grim. No celebration now, no declarations of victory. Begin reclassifying all Terran juveniles as combat-trained assets, he ordered. Full weapons-grade potential, another commander protested. With all due respect, these are still children. Their physiology. They've already taken 7 ships, Commander, Vekton cut in. They've shut down a relay station. They've hijacked our own AI. They're not prisoners anymore. They're operatives. General Arkash, silent at the edge of the table, finally spoke. "You don't understand what's happening," he said. "You're still thinking like conquerors. You think in systems and orders and maps." He leaned forward. "Humans don't fight like that, not when it comes to their young." He opened a data file. It was decades old, recovered from Earth's deep state servers. It detailed a final training protocol from Project Nestfire, called Initiative Phoenix, a survival doctrine for children aged 6 to 16, meant for use in case of planetary loss. The final directive? In absence of nation, flag, or fleet act. As your own army, protect each other, complete the mission. Burn everything in your way. The other commanders stared. "Are you saying this was intentional?" one whispered. "No," Arkash replied. "I'm saying this was inevitable." Elsewhere, in the shadows of a derelict cargo vessel now repurposed into a mobile base, the children of Theta 9 gathered. They no longer wore uniforms. They'd crafted armor from scavenged hull plating, painted their hands in red, marked their faces with black lines, just like in the Nestfire training. Their leader, a girl named Alira, barely 14, stood before a broken command console and tapped out a message. Nest awakened. Phase 2 initiated. All systems ignite. In the blink of a light year, dormant satellites on the edge of the Orion Drift lit up with human codes. Navigation beacons flickered. AI subroutines built to lie dormant for years activated and transmitted the same phrase: Nestfire burns. Return the children or face extinction. And far away, aboard the Zalvari capital dreadnought, General Arkash stood alone in the war chamber and whispered, "You didn't kidnap prisoners. You triggered the fuse on the last thing holding back the storm." In the deep black between systems, where stars were just pinpricks and shadows had shadows, an old Terran saying was spreading like a contagion: "You don't steal the cubs unless you're ready for the wrath of the den." By now, the Zalvari command knew they had made a mistake, but they still believed it was manageable, calculable, containable. They were wrong. Because humanity wasn't coming to negotiate. Humanity wasn't sending diplomats or terms. Humanity was already inside the Gi walls. It began with the fall of the Harvex listening ring, a massive surveillance station perched on the outer rim of Zalvari-controlled space. A fortress of steel and silence, guarded by gun platforms and patrolled by drones. Built to monitor long-range threats, considered impenetrable. It went dark in 13 minutes. The only footage recovered showed flashes of light, strange flickers of movement, and a single, chilling image of a child's face peering through a cracked bulkhead window smiling. By the time a fleet arrived, they found the station gutted. Every critical system gone. The reactors stripped, the memory cores extracted, the crew left alive but all unconscious, knocked out, not killed. And carved into the Admiral's chair with plasma scoring: "You can't cage what was raised in fire." The real escalation came not from the children, but from those who had trained them. The Nestfire protocol had operated in secrecy for decades, even after it was supposedly dismantled. Its instructors were Ghost Sec Special Forces, Black Ops tacticians, failed assassins turned teachers. Many were presumed dead, others in hiding. They weren't dead. They were waiting. The moment the footage of the captured children spread through Earth's underground networks, the old protocol was reactivated. In abandoned silos beneath Alaska, in bunkers hidden beneath Martian lava tubes, in orbital scrapyards drifting through Jupiter's shadow, they woke up. And they moved. Zalvari supply convoys began vanishing. Not in fire and destruction, but in silence. Whole fleets found their navigation systems reprogrammed mid-jump, cargo bays emptied, command codes erased, left drifting in space, useless. On Colony Outpost Delta 4, Zalvari soldiers reported an insurgency incident. They claimed it was a rebel cell. What they didn't know was that the rebels weren't colonists. They were 10-year-olds, raised on war games, trained in chokeholds and EMP deployment. They had learned from the Nestfire virtual simulators designed to teach battlefield improvisation through childhood puzzles. And they weren't fighting for medals. They were fighting for their own. One Zalvari drone commander tried to contain them, cornering a squad of escapees in a deactivated mining shaft. He sent in combat bots, the best the Empire had. None returned. When he finally descended himself, the only thing he found was a wall, scrawled with childlike handwriting. "You gave us darkness. Thank you. Now you can't see us coming." Even Arkash, who had tried to warn the command council, was stunned by the scale of what was unfolding. This wasn't resistance. This was a coordinated insurgency spanning star systems. Human AI sleeper nodes buried in old junkyards suddenly came online, launching virus payloads into Zalvari communications. Supply networks buckled. Entire prison stations began broadcasting falsified location data, making them impossible to track. It was war by shadows. And it was accelerating. Desperate, the Zalvari deployed the Harrowfang Protocol, a total lockdown order authorizing orbital strikes against any prison facility in danger of compromise. Arkash fought it, but he was overruled. Within days, 2 facilities were vaporized, killing hundreds of human children along with their guards. The galaxy held its breath. Earth didn't respond. Not with words, not with threats. But within 36 hours, 5 Zalvari military academies were reduced to craters. One was hit with a kinetic rod from orbit fired from an abandoned Earth freighter that no one had seen move in 20 years. Another was flooded by its own atmospheric processor reverse using a signal bounced from an old Terran space telescope on Titan. The precision was terrifying. No civilian casualties, no wasted fire. Just targets, executed. The message was clear. You touch another one of ours, we erase everything you've ever built. Panic set in. Recruitment into Zalvari war academies plummeted. Their own soldiers began deserting. Some even joined the humans, offering maps, codes, intelligence, anything to avoid being on the wrong side of this vengeance. The Empire's elite, once proud of their conquest, began changing their tune. Some claimed they had opposed the child captures all along. Others issued public apologies. One Zalvari prince even tried to return the children in secret. His flagship was boarded before he could. The children were taken. The prince spared his palace, leveled by a groundquake bomb made from parts of a toaster, an oxygen tank, and a repurposed mining drill, designed by a 13-year-old. Humanity didn't just fight. They taught their young to adapt, to learn, to never stop moving. Every strike taught the children more. Every mistake became a weapon. Every attempt at recapture only made the survivors smarter, faster, harder. And now the children weren't just surviving, they were leading. From a hidden asteroid hub in a dead system, a Lyra leader of the Nestfire escapees watched a star map glow red with every disrupted supply line and sabotaged outpost. She didn't smile. She didn't laugh. She just whispered, "This isn't revenge. This is insurance." Another child handed her a coded datapad. The time had come. She keyed in a phrase that would trigger every sleeper node Earth had buried. In Zalvari space, a generation ago. Initiate Phase 3. Open the wounds. And across the stars, the Empire's greatest fear finally dawned on them. They hadn't been fighting a rebellion. They were fighting an education. The sky above the Zalvari capital world of Nithis burned a color it had never known: ashen. Blue, tinged with fire. In orbit, the royal shipyards, once bustling with the hum of warcraft and the pride of empire, floated silent and crippled. Their defense rings were intact, their turrets fully charged. But none had fired. Not even once, because the attack hadn't come from above. It had come from inside. At precisely 400 Galactic Standard, 22 human children previously declared missing after their escape from detention facility. 12 walked unchallenged through the heart of the Zalvari defense complex. Their movements were timed down to the second. Internal codes passed through retinal ID hacked from stolen implants. Internal cameras looped expertly, frames scrubbed, patrol paths altered. By the time the defense SI noticed something was wrong, they were already in the reactor core. And they left it humming just unstable enough to draw every drone and emergency crew in the sector. While elsewhere, 3 cargo tugs, now loaded with black market weapon caches and a half-dozen Nestfire trained teens, docked silently with the main power array. One of the engineers found the message later, etched onto the cooling conduit in Terran English. "We don't need your weapons. We brought better ones. Ours have names and blood and homes you stole." For all its power, the Zalvari Empire had forgotten what it meant to face a threat with nothing to lose. And now they were seeing the result of generations of war compressed into the hands Of those too young to remember peace. But the turning point didn't. Come from sabotage or strikes. It came from something the Zalvari feared even more than war. It came from unity. They didn't understand it at first, how every Terran-aligned pirate faction, every exiled admiral, every colony militia that had once bickered over fuel or territory or pride suddenly stopped fighting each other. How they all began responding to the same signals, the same encryption layer, the same three-word rally code spoken in low voices across every system. Bring them home. Even old Terran enemies, outer rim smugglers, deep core warlords, post-collapse syndicates joined in. Not for profit, not for control. But for the one thing humanity had always held sacred, long after its politics fell apart and its cities turned to glass. The pack. You don't break the pack. And now, the pack was coming. The Nestfire Protocol, once thought dead, had matured. Nestfire wasn't a program anymore. It was a network, a doctrine, a shared mindset encoded into those who had been trained not just to survive war, but to build new war from its ashes. The final twist? They were no longer alone. The Nest Keepers had returned. These weren't children. These were the instructors, the ones who'd vanished when the original program was dismantled, scattered to the void. But they hadn't scattered aimlessly. They had gone underground. And now they were back. Commander Marin Cole, last surviving architect of Nestfire Alpha, reappeared aboard the shadow carrier Black Candle, leading a coalition of 30 rogue Earth warships long thought lost. Ships hidden in nebulae, in broken moons, in the shells of hollowed-out mining colonies. She addressed the galaxy with a transmission that hijacked every Zalvari screen, every comm station, every billboard. Her face was older now, scarred and lined, but her voice was steel. You took our children. You called it a strategy. You called it leverage. You called it victory. But you forgot one thing. Those kids weren't alone. They came from somewhere. From someone. And now we're here. She leaned closer to the feed. We taught them how to make peace. You taught them what happens when peace dies. The feed ended with one word burned into the screen in glowing red. Now. Within minutes, the entire Zalvari central data grid collapsed, not from an external attack, but from internal corruption. Code seeded decades ago by dormant Earth satellites rewrote access protocols across thousands of worlds. Doors locked, power failed. Drones turned on their handlers. The Empire watched in horror as their own infrastructure became a weapon against them. And then, the black ships arrived. Silent, angular, human in design, but augmented by decades of stolen alien tech. Their hulls were cold matte black, unreadable to scanners. Their signatures ghost-like, weaving through gravity wells like myths made metal. They didn't broadcast warnings. They didn't offer surrender. They cut through the fleet, defenses like they were nothing. One Zalvari dreadnought launched everything it had: plasma torpedoes, radiation flares, nanite mines. It never landed a single hit. The ship disappeared in a flash of its own reactor imploding, hacked by an 8-year-old on board the Nestfire corvette Little Teeth, who laughed while chewing bubblegum. The Zalvari began to panic. This wasn't a war. This was collapse. In the war chambers, generals screamed at each other. Orders flew. Fleets recalled. Territories abandoned. No strategy held. No protocol mattered, because the enemy wasn't playing by their rules. Humanity had always been underestimated. Their ships crude. Their alliances fragile. Their civilization a patchwork of old tech and stubborn pride. But now, that patchwork was unified by one purpose. Not domination. Not revenge, but return. The children weren't bargaining for peace. They were coming to collect what was stolen, and behind them, the Firewalkers marched. The lost ones, the Nest Keepers, the veterans of Earth's broken history, all of them carrying the same message. We don't want your territory. We don't want your throne. We want our family. And if we have to tear down your stars to get them, we will. General Arkash watched the final fleet signal from his command spire and knew the war was lost. Not because of failure, but because they had never really understood their enemy. Humans didn't win through force. They won through refusal to break, to kneel, to forget. And now, the Empire was facing what it had truly awakened. Not a rebellion, not a military campaign, but a generation of children raised in war. Leading an army of ghosts. The sky over Zalvari Prime ignited not with the blaze of orbital cannons or the flash of nuclear fire, but with silence. A silence so deep it suffocated the stars. And then came the howl. A low, rising tone across every communication band, every frequency, every neural net. At first, it was unrecognizable. Then chillingly familiar. It was the sound of a child screaming, not in pain, not in fear, in rage. 12 seconds later, the storm began. The black ships emerged from folded space with zero warning. No gravimetric ripple, no warp signature. They didn't need to follow the Empire's physics anymore. They'd rewritten the rules using stolen tech, human ingenuity, and the kind of desperation only a species born on a hellworld could understand. Each ship bore no flags, no nameplates, only symbols etched into the hulls by hand. Cracked eggs, burning nests, a child's handprint in red. This wasn't a fleet. It was a reckoning. Zalvari dreadnoughts opened fire, panicked. But it was like shooting shadows. The black ships were small, fast, unpredictable. They struck from inside gravity wells, using planetary pull to slingshot kinetic rods through ship after ship. They bypassed shields entirely, skipping energy dispersal zones and punching through armor with solid steel. Simple, brutal, terrifyingly effective. On the ground, orbital shields flickered and collapsed as Nestfire saboteurs already embedded in power stations and hubs triggered simultaneous failures. Infrastructure collapsed in minutes. Cities went dark. And then came the drop pods. Not like traditional human troop carriers, no thunderous landers or mechs. These were surgical strikes, each one the size of a coffin, fired from stealth corvettes. Silent, needle-shaped. They pierced the atmosphere and slammed into key military targets: palace spires, command bunkers, air control towers. Each one opened with a hiss, and out stepped children. Not afraid, not armed with traditional weapons, but armed with knowledge, with vengeance, with tools repurposed into blades, with tech hacked into war machines. Alira was the first to breach the Imperial Citadel, now known as the Spire of Command. The guards inside barely had time to aim before they were taken down with taser darts, built from stolen medical injectors. She moved like she had trained for this moment her entire life. She had. Inside, the Zalvari High Council gathered in panic. The doors were locked, reinforced with Imperial steel. It took the Nestfire team 34 seconds to breach them. No one died in that room. Not yet. Instead, the children flooded in, calm, measured. Alira stepped forward and placed a small device on the table. A hologram flickered to life, images of every captured human child, footage from prison ships, sound clips of screams, medical files, interrogation logs. Then the hologram zoomed out. It showed every detention center. Every one of them, now liberated. Alira looked each of the Zalvari leaders in the eyes and said one sentence: "Your empire ends now, or your species ends next." They laughed. Until the floor beneath them shook. Boom. It wasn't a bomb. It was the sound of the Earthborn. The Nest Keepers had arrived, the old warriors, the teachers, the broken veterans who had raised these children not as soldiers, but as survivors. Men and women who had fought in the last true war and vowed never again, until the Empire took their children. Now they came not as reinforcements, they came as extinction. "Commander," Marin Cole entered the council chamber clad in matte black armor. Patched from a dozen battlefields, her face was hard. Her eyes cold. She had been declared dead 20 years ago. Now she stood at the center of the Empire's heart. "I gave you a chance," she said. "I gave you one." A Zalvari minister stood snarling. "You're a relic. Your people are savages. You taught your children to fight like monsters." "No," she interrupted. "You taught them that." She looked to Alira. "Finish it." The girl nodded. She activated the uplink. Across the planet, every screen turned white. And then, a message played on loop one the Zalvari never expected to hear. "We surrender." But it wasn't human voices saying it. It was Zalvari captains, Zalvari generals. One by one, ships began powering down. Not from human attack, but from mutiny, soldiers refusing to kill children, officers refusing to fire on the humans who had spared their families. The war machine of the Empire began to cannibalize itself, and as the fleet crumbled, Earth's real message came through, asterisk, "We are not monsters, but we are what monsters fear. Return what was taken, or we will take everything." General Arkesh stood on the shattered observation deck of his once proud dreadnought, staring at the chaos. He didn't resist. He knelt because he had seen what the others hadn't. This wasn't just vengeance. This was a lesson the galaxy would never forget. And as the Nestfire banners were raised, simple cloth, burned edges stitched with blood and hope, the final human fleet arrived. Not to conquer, but to reclaim. Ships bearing families, medics, engineers, psychologists, because now that the battle was over, humanity would do what it always did, rebuild, but this time, without forgetting. Because now the galaxy knew, you don't steal Earth's children. Not if you value your species. Not if you want your stars to keep shining. The war was over. Not with a treaty. Not with fireworks, but with silence. In the grand halls of the Zalvari Senate, once towering monuments of pride and power, the flags were gone. Their banners, once embroidered with conquest, now hung in tatters. The only sound was the low hum of repair drones and the shuffle of human boots over polished marble. And outside, across the shattered cities of Zalvari Prime, a new symbol had risen, a child's handprint painted red over a burned nest. The mark of Nestfire. Alira stood on a raised platform at the edge of the spire, staring out at the alien world that had once tried to erase her. She didn't feel joy. She didn't feel triumph. She felt responsibility. Behind her, Nestfire children walked in pairs, organizing medical shipments and coordinating refugee convoys. Former enemies worked side by side, some Zalvari medics now serving under human direction. The scars of war were fresh, but there was no more fighting. Not because Earth had crushed the Zalvari, but because Earth had shown them who they really were. And it had been enough. In the ruins of a detention center, now turned into a memorial, General Arkesh walked alone. He traced the names carved into the stone wall, names of children, both alien and human, who had died before the war had even begun. Children caught in the machinery of empires. He paused before a small plaque. Nestfire Initiate, Tyran L, age 10, gave his life so others could escape, never forgotten. The general lowered his head. A tear slipped down his rough cheek. No one had taught the Zalvari to mourn like this. But now he did, because now he understood. In a universe obsessed with power, Earth had been mocked for its chaos. Its species called reckless, emotional, weak, and yet, when pushed, when cornered, when their future was stolen, humanity hadn't unleashed monsters. They'd unleashed memory. Every child they took had carried not just anger, not just vengeance, but the entire history of a species that had clawed its way through extinction again and again. Humanity didn't break. They learned. They evolved. They waited. And when the moment came, they struck not with rage, but with precision. Across the galaxy, Other races watched with uneasy awe. Pirate kings deleted bounty lists with human names. Slave markets burned their earthborn stock records. Entire empires paused their conquests and reevaluated what a minor species truly meant. And the phrase that echoed across space like a whispered warning in 1,000 languages was, "Don't take Earth's children on Earth." For the first time in generations, the nations were united, not by threat, not by ideology, but by return. The children came home. Not all of them. Some chose to stay. Some chose to help rebuild the very worlds that once imprisoned them. Because Nestfire didn't raise conquerors. It raised protectors. Leaders. Legends. Maren. Cole sat in the ruins of her old training bunker in Alaska, watching the sunrise for the first time in 15 years. A small screen on her wrist blinked gently. A message from Alira. Phase 4 complete. Reconstruction underway. They listen now, Maren smiled. Just barely. I never wanted this, she said softly to the wind. But if this is what it took for them to understand, then so be it. In orbit above Zalva space, what remained of the black ships began to vanish one by one, not destroyed, not retired. Just gone. Some say they're hidden in the void, waiting for the next child taken. Others believe the ships became homes, places where Nestfire now trains not for war, but for peace with teeth. Because peace, as Earth had learned, was not something given. It was something guarded. And those who guard it must never forget where they came from. In the last broadcast of the Nestfire network, a child's voice read a message recorded long ago, an old audio clip from the Nestfire archives. If they steal your light, become the fire. If they take your name, carve a new one in steel. If they hurt your family, remember, you are the storm, you are the nest, and you will never burn alone. The feed ended. The galaxy exhaled. And Earth was no longer just a world. It was a warning, a legend. Promise, you don't take from humanity. Not their pride, not their past, and never ever their children.